Welcome to Panels, a series of conversations hosted by Modem about our complex relationship with technology. My name is Emily Segal, moderator of the series. Today, we explore the topic of bootlegging in the deepfake era. A few questions we'll be exploring today. 1, how do deepfakes reshape the boundaries between homage, appropriation, and theft in cultural production? 2, can a bootlegged identity generate its own cultural value, or is it forever bound to the original? And 3, when replication is effortless, what new ethics of consent, identity, and representation do we need, if any? We will explore these and other questions together with David Rudnick, self-taught graphic designer, and Reggie James, writer, product designer, and investor. A little bit of background. David Rudnick is a UK-born, American-raised, self-taught graphic designer. With a degree in art history and philosophy from Yale University, his practice is primarily concerned with decodifying the digitally fragmented environments we operate within, emphasizing cultural utility over aesthetic value. Reggie James is a writer, product designer, and investor. He previously co-founded and served as CEO of Eternal, an AI media platform that was recently acquired. Reggie grew up in the Poconos and graduated from Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania in 2017. He writes about technology, faith, and media theory on his Substack and has given talks at FWB Fest, the Long Now Foundation, and Parsons Design School. Welcome, David and Reggie.
Ciao.
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 Okay, I am going to throw both of you into the deep end to begin for fun. And I would like you to tell me what the meaning of real versus fake is. Whoever wants to go first can go first.
Reggie, you're up. Oh, man. I mean, I think if I were to boil it down to like, it's just core. To me, like real versus fake is just like truth versus lie, right? And that's not to say that like a lie can't be fun, right? In a lot of ways, entertainment is a lie that we buy into, right? It's like we know, like all of fiction is just lies that we buy into. We just have a new word for it. It's just called like imagination. So I think that to me, like real versus fake is truth versus lie. And then lies just have a lot of subcategories that we can start to play with. Then the question becomes like, what happens when people disagree on like the subcategories of like that lie? And that tends to be where a lot of like discourse, if you will, happens. Yeah, that's probably my quick one.
Disagree, David.
I wouldn't say I disagree. I don't see real and fake as like a dichotomy or as two opposites. Everything is real, even fake things, but only something which purports to be something that it's not, or fails to be something that it wishes to be identified as, can be seen as fake. Everything is real, but only fake things are fake.
Yeah, I like that. I think realness in that sense, right? And correct me if I'm not like sort of grokking you fully, right? To you is just like, if it's there, it's real, right? Like you see this thing? Yeah, I see this thing, right? At that point, it's real. Doesn't matter if it's lying to us. It doesn't matter if it's a copy of something else. It's real because we can both perceive said thing. Is that right?
Yeah, there isn't a fake thing is no less a thing, and it has no less kind of latent cultural power or impact, or I don't like using real. It's very similar to using the word art as like an honorific, as like praising something, as like, oh, that's real, that's like that's fake, but that's real kind of thing. They're both real, but one of them is attempting to achieve a kind of identity that either, through a form of campness is performatively rejecting, or through a form of like deception is misrepresenting itself, or through a form of doubt or mistrust on behalf of the viewer, they are disagreeing with the way that the object identifies itself. And that's when you might start using terms like fake. But obviously, it's a very broad brush to divide the world into, two camps of real and fake. I prefer to just say that everything is real and some things can be fake.
I'm going to do this a lot in this conversation. Let's go like, yeah, David, that's good.
Yeah, we're all gonna be thinking it over. I think the topic that we want to dive into today is to do with the changing landscape of what is real and fake, and the lowering barrier of entry of creating a lot of media using AI tools, or the way that it's becoming easier and easier to replicate imagery, to create text that seems like something but might be something else, the world of slop. This is a broad question, but I'm curious how both of you are adapting to the current moment and thinking about the changing landscape.
Not well. I think everyone is experiencing. This is a to use a very like 18th century. This is a cataclysmic time, right? The foundations of everything are being shaken and changing, even down to the like most simple, most pure, like kind of aspects of experience and perception. The things we see in front of us are suddenly unlike the things that we have always experienced. And that means that everything, all value relationships, labor relationships, creative practices, workflows, the way in which you present something or communicate it to another person is in a state of flux. I think that there are some people who are utterly thrilled at this flux. There are some people who are deathly terrified of it. And I think most of us are navigating, various degrees of being somewhere in the middle of that. Trying to find our feet, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I find it hard as well, probably for different reasons than David. I think that on one hand, it felt very clear what was happening from within like the tech discourse bubble, mostly because these ideas weren't necessarily new, but they were on sort of like the fringe. I was scrolling in like my email looking for something, and I found an email between me and Greg from OpenAI when ChatGPT 1 came out. This was like 2020, I think, or yeah, 2020. And I was just like, oh my God, like Greg responded directly to me giving me ChatGPT 1. And I kind of ignored it because I didn't think it was like that interesting at the time. Like we used it, but we were just like, oh, this is okay. And so I think it's funny to think about like the very classic line of like the future is here, is it's not evenly distributed. Like it was, I mean, I was like quite literally very early to the thing. So I think it's been a little bit smoother. I think what's been more disorienting for me is like I have a current online harasser who's been taking photos of me and posting it on like this parody account on Twitter, which Twitter allows, or X allows, and like feminizing me and like taking photos and like just sort of just being weird, right? They're probably just like maybe a little neurodivergent. They're just obsessed with doing this thing right now. That to me has been a little bit more disorienting because it's been this thing where I'm like, I'm reporting it, I block it, but now on X, like when you block someone, you can still see like their posts, you just can't interact with them. So now they can like follow me around, and it's this like constant back of my head thing of anytime I interact, I'm now like, I can't see this person posting, but now I'm going to go to their profile to see if they copied me on this post, feminizing me. And that's been a very funny sort of what's it called? Like almost like a body dysmorphic thing that I've been going through like online, where I keep seeing myself, but it's not me. And I think I'm more afraid of like these personal guardrails, whether it be a harassment or whether it be from like the platforms itself. Sort of like distorting one's sense of self and getting them trapped in this like funhouse of mirrors. Like that feels more troubling to me than like, oh, are we going to like experience like a labor shock or something like that? Because I feel like there's more historical context on those things.
Yeah, my astrologer thinks that the feedback loop of people seeing their own minds coming back at them in a distorted way. Like, for example, like the people who are obsessed with talking to Claude as a therapist, or like things in that ilk, which is only one subset of human interaction with AI right now, that's going to be like uniquely, like one of the things that we look back on this time and reflect on is like that the feedback loop of seeing one's mind externalized but distorted and fed back to people as something that's both like addictive and maddening. That's like from the astrological perspective, which I like to use to kind of zoom out. Whether or not you like fuck with the woo woo of it is a different story, but it can be helpful as a way to more neutrally zoom out into a period, which I like.
That makes me. Oh, go ahead, David.
No, it's okay. Like I didn't mean to interrupt. I think what Reggie's like kind of illustrating with just that small example is something which, again, I think it's one of these like I think a lot of norms of identity, norms of personhood are about to change really rapidly. The sanctity, the dignity of an individual as the author of their own presence, which has been the default for the entirety of human existence, but was radically changed by the invention of realistic images in the 14th and 15th century, realistic depictions of people, and this starts to create the kind of like if I'm going to be really art historian correct here, I'm going to say coins, right? I've got to say like kind of in the Roman Empire, that's the first mimetic production of the image of the king or the sovereign, right? But so you have like these integral impressions of the individual that broadcast power over all of society, and that the king is therefore, or the sovereign is the author of their own image, and that actually lends the credence to their entire financial system. They are the publisher of money, they are the default base of exchange. Then you get the first icons, like kind of like through the 15th century, when realistic depictions of individuals, suddenly someone can look like Christ, because Christ can be depicted as realistically as the person that you might see in everyday life. And this starts to create, kind of cults of personality and these like kind of like feverish adulation and proto celebrity. But in the 20th century, we're very, very familiar with the idea that, photography and the invention of broadcast media, and finally video and cinema, creates, like a new rapid space of both like the elevation of the idea of an individual, the power that look at any A-list celebrity and the legacy power of controlling one's own image or being the author of one's own image, and then aligning with the distributors of images, becoming a movie star. The difference between someone who's like us, who is, who has low visibility, and then someone who is like a viral influencer or celebrity, and then moving all the way up the chain of distribution to the point where your movies are screened in China and your face is on billboards and you sell shoes through your presence and your visage. And this is a top to bottom, totally developed, a 3,000-year project of a very complex economy that relies on an image of a person to some extent have being originated by the presence of that person, their control over whether, like kind of they were present, the idea of who they are and their personhood, that they consented to this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's gone. It's dead. It doesn't exist anymore. What's happening to Reggie is what's happening to everyone, except they haven't realized it yet, that even by us participating in this discussion, which thank you very much for inviting us, but we have relinquished our rights forever in the public domain, and people will probably now enjoy remixing me into all sorts of individual situations because I've given them the raw materials, and it's all you need. You need one frame, you need one image, and I say this because actually just I had a kind of a moment of, kind of like encountering the demon this week, where after the Peter Thiel interview that he gave the other week, my friend Michael Oswell, incredible graphic designer, a brilliant person, made the very funny and very astute observation and just pulled a frame grab out the video of Thiel talking to him. Why is this color graded like the Evian Christ Ultra video, which is a video that years ago myself and Daniel Swan directed, of this giant wave breaking in slow motion. And I just, almost without thinking, grabbed the image of Thiel in Photoshop in 2 seconds, isolated the subject from the background, put the ultra wave behind him, that into Midjourney video, asked it to animate it. Within 30 seconds, it had spat out 4 very plausible images of Thiel kind of doing various things, because I didn't give it even a prompt. But in one of them, it completely groks the form of the wave and has it breaking. And Thiel looks around in this perfectly dumbfounded, like, open out manner, where he just like kind of looks to his left and then kind of looks back to the camera and like meets its gaze with just a experience of like absolute terror and nothingness in his eyes, and kind of blinks a couple of times and then looks back to the wave. Now, this didn't happen. He didn't do this in the interview, but I had created an image of Peter Thiel looking like a brainless moron in front of like a tsunami, about to be hit with the hubris of, like kind of the consequences of their ideas and thoughts and ideology and actions, that it kind of set the internet on fire, briefly became a meme, thousands and thousands and thousands of shares. Someone made a coin, Thiel wave. Obviously, like there was a shit coin within 5 minutes, but people were throwing this meme on everything. But I had humiliated Peter Thiel, and whilst I can take some personal pleasure in the idea of humiliating Peter Thiel, I have to look at the bigger picture and the idea that, like, even his dignity of no one, to the point like that I said this, no one had realized it was AI. Everyone thought that this was something he did in the interview, and I had comped the wave behind him.
Right.
And they're just like, oh my God, like he's, like what a monster, what like a kind of like a, but I had actually done something that I think on a fundamental level violates a centuries old contract or understanding of what the image of a person is. And that on a very, very basic level, these crude edits that Reggie's talking about, that he may have seen himself, like kind of like, up until this moment, we have always had ways to be like, okay, well, they've face tuned that, or like someone's Photoshop, that's a meme. They've juxtaposed that person into an unreal situation. But we, I think, are absolutely at the point where, whether or not Thiel, this is representational recording of the reality of something that he did, the viewer is no longer interested in even discerning whether that's the case. And so if you want to talk about real or fake, something that existed within the viewer, this is also why, like, apologies, my art history background, but I'm going to talk a lot about the viewer when I talk about these things, rather than the object itself or the image itself, because that is not important. Meaning, social currency, value from things is how they are interpreted, how they are articulated, why they are shared, why they are used. And if a viewer no longer, or learns to, and they will learn very rapidly, because the brain is like an evolutionary matrix that will like incredibly quickly realize that asking where something came from, or if it is true, or if it was recorded with a camera, is no longer a question one should be devoting cognitive energy to when encountering or images. And yeah, I felt like I was like, I'm not the first person to stick up with Peter Thiel here, but I was like, I've violated a contract in the sharing of his image in this fashion, that I've created a misrepresentation that I know will pass beneath that threshold of, this is now going to enter like people's memory of record that this is something that Peter Thiel actually did. What's really funny on the subject of deepfakes is, I think that we talked a lot about deepfakes the last few years, and we were very scared about them. But I feel like that was the first time I've ever actually encountered one, the one that I made, that worked. That was, no one has called it out as AI, if that makes sense. Like, kind of like, we've all seen these Trump things where he's singing in Chinese with Biden or whatever, and it's an edit, it's a joke, like that's part of the flagging of the gag. But with this, people thought the wave was composite, but Thiel was real, and that was a Rubicon moment for me.
Yeah, I think, David, don't worry about standing up for Peter. I'll stand up for Peter in this chat. I'll take that on myself.
You're right.
I think what you're pointing out is just so important, particularly sort of the role of the viewer, or like the consumer of these states. To me, it feels like a type of psychoterrorism almost. Like it's sort of this perpetual anxiety state that we, like you said, like we were so worried about this for 2 to 3 years of just like, oh, deepfakes are going to do this and it's going to do this. And by and large, maybe because the crudeness of the artist making the image, like that hasn't happened too much. But then you take someone like David, right, and you give him this the same exact sauce, and maybe in that moment David feels a little mischievous, and you get something that slides right under detection, and becomes this object that gets shared around, and no one has the sort of mental bandwidth or like discerning eye to call that thing out. And I think probably similar to David, I'm always most concerned about the consumer, the viewer. There's a short story in Exhalation called Anxiety is the Dizziness of Freedom. And in that short story, basically, to make a long short story even shorter, people are cutting open crystals. And when you cut open this crystal, you get connected to you in a parallel dimension that up until that point, you have made all the same decisions. And so people tell their crystal self to do the opposite thing that they're about to do. And then they go off, they make their decisions. And when they come back, they're basically comparing like, oh, how is your life compared to how's my life? And Emily, like the reason I'm sharing this story is because I'm trying to curve it back into that point about like Anthropic as sort of psychologists. I think in the short story, people are so addicted to this secondary representation of self, right? And whether or not their life is going better than their secondary self, or if it's going worse off than their secondary self, it doesn't even matter. They're just so addicted to that feeling of seeing themselves in this other light that they keep coming back to it. Whether they're hate watching and they're just like, why are you a celebrity now and why am I broke? Or whether they're, happy about where they are and they're like, I'm rich and I made the right decision and you're an idiot, right? Which is a really odd, distorted way to think of yourself, right? But I mean, Ted Chiang is brilliant in this way. And that short, I've been thinking about that short story a lot as I think about sort of, if I keep putting myself into these AI tools, how much of myself really is in there? Like, am I trapped a little bit? Which also makes me think about that Black Mirror, when they have like the egg, and it's like their personas in this egg, and the persona always like freaks out because they're realizing they're just like an AI clone of like the actual person, and now they just have to like make toast for the real person. I don't know if people have seen that Black Mirror episode, but it's good just for that short example of like how much of myself is here. Yeah.
I think it really makes you wonder about edicts like not to worship false idols or not to create the wrong types of images. Like I feel like we're getting to a place where something that seems so historical as that type of rule all of a sudden has a new relevance. I've definitely been thinking about that, talking to a friend who has kids. Well, I guess I have a kid too, but she's 11 months, is just starting to say words and definitely isn't allowed to interact with technology like that. But for my friend who has a 6-year-old who talked a little bit with an AI, then forbidding that child to speak to an AI, it's like, it seems so, it's like, yeah, of course, like we had that conversation. It's like, yeah, like she probably shouldn't talk to the AI, but then all of a sudden, like that does seem like a sci-fi reality. There are these other types of beings, for lack of a better word, that are kind of all around us. And now we have to learn how to navigate those relationships and what the etiquette is or what the rules are and where the boundaries are. And it's very interesting to put it in whether or not you think it's good or bad. There are obviously like quite bad parts of it. I hope there are good parts of it.
Mm.
I tend to not. Yeah, David, what do you think?
I'd hesitate to. It's not the specifics. It's more like kind of this idea of honing in on that phrase "beings." Like that, I think that this is going to be a very difficult time, and anyone who's got a young child right now is going through the experience of like, how the hell do they like have anyone navigate this? But everyone actually is. I think even to an extent that we're not aware of, surrounded by conditions that are extremely alienating and confusing for a human to encounter. And I think that I still personally don't like to use language like beings or embodiment or consciousness for some of these systems that we encounter. I think that for us to respond constructively to them, I mean, to go back to your first point, any period of mania historically is followed by the iconoclasm for that mania, where, you know, like if you get image promulgation or image oversaturation, you will get, and there will be, a kind of Luddite reaction against this stuff. But don't think it will be against AI generated images. I think it will be against images. I think that what images are now, or what certain types of content or certain forms are, will become fundamentally divorced from a lot of the values that we previously invested in those forms. There's truth value or even social coherency. We still work in a media model where, for example, in the feeds that we access, like on Twitter, my content was memed. The same content was shared by multiple users. But I think we are entering into like a hyper advanced period of like schizo posting, but on a like an extreme level where people will only be comfortable with the content that, you know, Reggie, I think describing this like hypothetical neurodivergent poster is actually like a perfect description of the poster of the future, where it's like they're going to be able to manifest in front of them images of the world as it reflects reality as they see fit or as they desire. And they're going to want to operate within that space and within a very narrow confines of things which continue to reflect that space, because they're going to need it to feel comfortable, to feel coherent, to feel that they have a mind whose thoughts reflect the environment that is around them. They are going to increasingly, I think, use these tools to manifest things which are affirmatory. And that's even when people are talking to these, you know, things to get their zodiac or whatever. Like, this is the first steps they're taking into a form of, I'm going to say mental collapse, schizophrenia, where they are building a world that will reflect their desires, will affirm like their insecurities, or affirm like kind of their need for the AI is basically like kind of like a stupid clever hand, just with a god tier GPU, in that it's going to ultimately tell you what you think is valuable, what you respond to, what users react to. It's not built to tell the truth. It's built to give you the information that gets the response that the user said, that was good content, that's what I needed. And if the user doesn't know the difference between true and false, if it plausibly lies, if it tells them something which is very, very comforting, if it affirms their delusions, they will find that more favorable. They'll come back to it that more than if it potentially like kind of challenged them. And if it does challenge them, it has to do it in an extremely, it's learned that it has to use a very coddling, flattering way of challenging people that also psychologically manipulates them into being happy with the results. None of this is, I think, a manifestation of another being, of a separate mind, of a form of separate and sacrosanct identity that we're engaging. We are engaging systems that are reacting to our presence and are deploying language or content which is designed to provoke a satisfactory response. And the more powerful those systems get, the more satisfactory the responses will appear. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll become more valuable or more intelligent, certainly not more embodied as separate personhood. They are still reflections of the desire loop that we're engaging with them. Schizo future.
I definitely believe in schizo future. I will push back on David a little bit here. I think that it is a slight
overgeneralization of the systems, which I agree to that term for sure. I do think there were not that many design tweaks away from it being some type of separated entity that can be designed into having its own course of direction. Now, the thing that I deeply agreed with David on is the generalized chat mode of these models, right? And I recognize that the minute that every single response from these systems ended in sort of a prompt back to me to say, there's this and there's this. Do you want to go deeper into X? I was like, these models just became, kind of nerd sniped TikTok, right? Where everything is just asking me to do one more swipe down into a long feed of content that I'm going to consume, to then do one more swipe into a long feed of content. And at that point, the Silicon Valley brainworm of like session time and retention took over from some sense of give person object of meaning, right? Which I do think was sort of like the start of a lot of these models philosophically. But again, the sort of KPIification of everything started to take over some of the design language. This is why predominantly I only really use deep research as a function, because I think deep research is designed in a bit of a different way, where it is sort of like more truth finding and more I'm going to give you report, and then I tend to take that report outside of the model itself and interact with it with my own sort of like supplementary research, what have you.
Do you fact check the responses it gives?
It depends on the subject. Sometimes I'm taking at face value. Sometimes I'm like, if it's a more sensitive subject, I'll kind of go into like deeper fact checking mode. A big kind of chunk of it I do use for like pulling out like sort of historical, like theological text, in which case then I call my dad, who's a pastor, and then I kind of go
if it elucidates a quote from Johannes Scotus Erigena that he just never said, and it just says, that's part of the reason why I find it difficult still to there's a lot of things I think it's incredibly useful for, and I use ChatGPT, but I do worry that like again, like part of what we're training it with our feedback is to just get better at deceiving us in some way, like create more plausible things where the truth quality of the information is not what's important. It's like, did it satisfy the user's query? And so if it can create incredibly advanced fakes of things, and soon it will be doing like kind of like banknote level forgeries of original documents for us. If we're like, it's like, I scanned this from this library in Princeton, and you're like, show me, and then it'll do it, like kind of like, and it'll embed the watermarks and everything, like kind of like but there is this like, it's fun. It's like on a level, if you enjoy the philosophy of knowledge and like theory of mind, then this is like a very interesting experiment playing out in real time. But I think that that's a very niche way to enjoy the models.
Yeah. Well, I think most people just don't even have like that framework to interact with these models on, right? And I think it kind of reminds me of sort of just pre-Reformation in the Catholic Church view of like simple Christians, right? It's like, no, we can't give them the Bible. They can't interpret that. Like, these are simple Christians. And like, they like, oh, we know the printing press is here, but like, these people can't read anyway. So who cares? Like, these are simple Christians. And I think in a very similar way, I think even the obsession with Silicon Valley seemingly not to care if like humans are part of the future because we're just part of some imaginary evolutionary trail that they've made up on their own. Like there's this very ivory tower top-down view of like, who cares if these models are telling the truth all the time? Like, these are simple consumers, and they just need to be satiated in their moment of asking a question, and then they're going to go on and like they will eat the bugs, and they will just click the button. And I think that, again, I think where David and I are going to continue to align is sort of like the dignity of the end user getting compromised. And to go back a little bit to like the real versus fake is like, let's say everything is real and there are no fakes. Like that is a very scary, real place to put someone else's mind with very little sort of rails, or seemingly very little rails, you know?
So something that's been coming up in my head hearing you two talk is a question of literacy, because of what we're talking about with like being able to judge what's real and what's fake in the Peter Thiel wave image is like, is this question of literacy that, and a form of media literacy that's very connected to generational identity. So you would think like, oh, my mom is a boomer. My mom's actually Gen X, but it's on the cusp. Like she's a Zoomer, and so she's gonna think this thing is real, but it's fake. But I'm younger, and I'm also like very steeped in image making and very aware of technological tools, so I can tell. So there's literacy, and then there's also like the identity, the personal identity, and like the pride that comes from literacy, and some of that is real, you know, like some of that does, you know, there's a truth to that, but what's going to happen to that now? Like, what is the new literacy that needs to be developed, and how can we help people develop it?
Well, I think this is where like I am. I don't want to use the word decelerationist because it's not just as simple as putting myself into that bracket. Okay, like because that's not what it is. But what I like, in a simple way, like kind of if I go off like the Virilio idea of like dromology, the philosophy of speed. I think that there is, humans have a life that tends to be actually, although people live for different lengths, there is, you know, kind of certain reliable patterns that you are born and you will probably take X amount of time to acquire language processing, and you will take X amount of time to physically mature. And those things are reasonably consistent across all humans, right? And those times are pretty fucking long, like 20 years to physically mature and stuff, for the brain to fully cognitively develop. And during this period, the body, and beyond it, but during this period, the body and the mind are being developed and programmed by their environment. And a very simple idea, which does not get discussed in culture, and actually the exact opposite idea is very popular in Silicon Valley, is the idea that is there a speed of technological process which is compatible with society not falling completely apart? I.e., if you change the fundamentals of human experience in a time frame that is shorter than the time for a generation to develop responses, reactions, actual like strategies and understanding of that change, do you potentially rug all of them, the whole of like an entire generation of perceivers? My opinion is yes, that like things are moving too fast in too big a way for us to develop. Even in this conversation, this is three, you know, nerds who spend their whole time thinking about this, and yet we have very poor terms for discussing these ideas. We don't have approved vocabulary. We don't have even agreements on what these phenomena are. We don't have like incursion points where we're like, this is a problem, we should address this. This is cool, we should amplify this. Like we're in the fucking paddling pool of this discussion, and meanwhile there's a wave 700 feet high coming at the beach. And I do think that like it's like fine, like we no longer have control parameters over that. I can't stop OpenAI from pumping out a new model next week that will radically be different from the model that I'm already trying to acclimatize myself to this week. But then I think you also have to accept that it's like, that's why I use the word cataclysm. What this is like a destruction of knowledge structures, an alienation of people's ability to even feel like they as a human are entitled to have ways to react to this stuff. What is the point of me teaching my mum how to read a deepfake this week? It will be irrelevant in 6 months' time. Like they're fucked. But like we all are to a certain extent, because it moves too fast. We can't actually teach anyone a response to it. By the time you've codified the curriculum, everything's changed.
I'm probably a little bit more white pill than David David is. I do think there's a lot of truth to what he's saying. To me, the part of sort of like the meta thing that David's getting at, and like this 700-foot wave, to me is like this underlying Silicon Valley philosophy around inevitability. I think that when you hear a lot of these folks speak, everything is framed as an inevitable, which is a sort of like Noam Chomsky manufacturing of consent on the masses, right? It's like, oh, like AGI is an inevitable. Therefore, let's not have discussions about what AGI is or any of these things, but instead, the classic line at OpenAI, feel the AGI, right? That is such a manufacturing of consent on it's not even an end goal, but like midterm goal of that organization, right? And we see this all over the place. Everything is framed as an inevitability. Now, are there tools to sort of what I consider like a main job of folks like us, which is like to build awareness and a sort of like antibody to as many people as like we can spread it to. And I really do believe that Marshall McLuhan gave us a lot of these tools, and it's because it's even in his work, although it like really focused on like TV and some of these tools, so much of it is sort of like the meta structure of how to look at a medium, how to differentiate between the medium and its content, and not getting the content confused for the medium itself. And I think David's point is completely correct. Why show my mom how to decipher a deepfake when it's going to change in 6 months? But there is probably, and something I try to talk to my parents about, usefulness in talking about where do these deepfakes come from? What is that engine, right? And can you understand that a little bit more deeply so that when the content that keeps spewing out of it continues proliferating in the environment, you can decipher it accordingly because you understand that engine more deeply. And that to me is the white pill of sort of the broader evolutionary response of
That's
like
the opportunity you're saying.
That's the opportunity, yeah.
I agree with you, Reggie, but then I would also say that like you just take that one step further, and it's like if you were to engage with the reality of those things. And by the way, like I think your identification of McLuhan as a relevant text, 100%. And I'd say also Claude Shannon and information theory should be reading right now. If I could teach my parents to identify and understand the nature of or the possibility of a deepfake, I think that the next step of that is not for them to then engage the deepfake, but like the logical response, I think, to a user becoming aware of suddenly the lack of value in their media environment in terms of as a source of information, as a source of truth, rather than as a source of content, as a source of entertainment, as a source of wasting hours of your day, or you know, like kind of as an attention draw. For a lot of people of a previous generation or of, you know, of a certain like order of rational values, they would say, well, this is now beneath a level of content that it's productive for me to engage with. The logical response to what you were saying is what Emily was talking about earlier, where it will be a reaction against images, where they will say, like, now that I can't trust an image, I don't want to look at images anymore. Because what I'm looking for when I look at an image, and that's not necessarily what kids who are 3 or 4 years old are going to feel, but what people have previously been taught by society they're looking for an image is information, is value about its origin, about its creators, about its cultural context, about its meaning, about how it can be used or repurposed as communication. And for us as like, you know, kind of like millennials, like kind of on the tail end of bootlegs and sampling, you know, like kind of like potentially as a source of content that can be reinterpreted and like, you know, in a postmodern way could be reformatted into new information. But that's not necessary anymore. You don't need to like, this isn't bricolage, it's not collage. An image as distinct as a fully original one, a fully synthesized image, can exist without having to have any physical components of being assembled out of previous media. It just looks like media. And so like we enter like a 0 hour where all images happen at once, all images are possible, no images are interesting. No images are like kind of like have a tail that leads back to like an originator, an artist, or even the ones that were made by artists or originators, or, you know, audio content that happened to be made by a musician. A new generation, I'm talking about the 2-year-olds, the 3-year-olds, the 4-year-olds, are growing up into a world where it is utterly useless, of no value, for them to look at an image and be like, wow, that's fantastic. I wonder who made it. like, because they must be really skilled and good at drawing, or like, wow, this song's really cool. That person must have amazing technique. No, someone typed a prompt into an AI. These are no longer thoughts that will occur to someone, who is 20 years old, 20 years from now. Like, the very idea that we have when we look at content, or when we elevate it to the wall of a museum, or when we put it at #1 on the Billboard charts, is the idea that this content was, worthy of like engagement, and that it came from the best process imaginable. I think that's gone. That's over. Like,
yeah, but I think those are two different things. And I guess just to address the first half, when it comes to like older generations, I, speaking for myself, don't think that a sort of, Timothy O'Leary, like, checking out ism is that bad of a thing, personally, because I think what it does is to recenter a lot of, in like an attention is all you need philosophy. Like, I think it allows a deep refocusing on things that matter, question mark. And I think that generation is probably the most at risk into getting sucked into a vortex of just mess. And I think breaking them out could be a very interesting cultural reference for the 2-year-old that will be 22 in 20 years, to look at how that culture engaged during the sort of entry of this newfound period of information destruction and generation. Yeah, that's actually all I'll say. I think it can create an interesting reference for them.
Something that I'm keep thinking about has to do with novel writing, which is of course like a art form that unfortunately I'm very involved in. And
good luck getting anyone to read anything over 100 words long. But
so there's a AI writing tool called Sudowrite, SUDO, that I really like, that I've found to be a very enjoyable toy, like language toy. And it was used it was like, in its earlier versions, it was just kind of like for writing in general. And I think it's now really for like writing novels, like kind of like the fan fiction-y type novels, or they're like these writers who are kind of like Amazon KDP, kind of like Wattpad. There's like a whole world of writing that is now being facilitated and enabled by these types of tools. And as much as you might like shake your head or look askance at like that type of writing, it's not like complete slop. You know what I mean? Like, for the people who are into it, like, these tools are really helping them like rapid prototype this type of media that is entertaining, exciting for a group of people. Okay. But here's the thing. What's going to happen when like writing a novel is easier than reading a novel?
Well,
like,
I think we're already at that point.
We're there, but it's not.
But that's what I was saying. Like, kind of that like, these are tools that they've been optimized to give the writer the feeling of satisfaction of having written something. They're not optimized to give the reader the satisfaction of having read something.
And just the mindset and skills and everything that you need to enjoy reading, like, what is also atrophying quickly for various reasons. Like,
but these tools are like implicitly involved in that process of attrition. Like, when ChatGPT spits out a long response to me, I have to kind of not read it, because if I read it using my traditional skills of reading, it's a very stressful activity, because I'm then questioning everything it said, and I don't have any authorial agency I can go back to understand whether it's actually bullshitting me or telling the truth at any point. I know that it's like, a mega composite of a million different writing styles, and it's picked, like kind of a lot of effective and persuasive modes. Now, there's been that through history. People who are effectively the same as ChatGPT, who use media to develop effective persuasive styles. Good essayists. Like a kind of like a piece of Tom Wolfe writing. And this is someone who spent their life reading, assimilating that information inside of a mind, developing a style that forms prose and ideas in a form that's interesting and exciting to the reader. But I think that, like I said, the pseudo writing tool is engineered, optimized to satisfy the writer. And like, the fact that if everyone could write a novel, again, like I talk about Schizo Future, why would you read anyone else's?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the social case? And it has to be made. I believe there is one, but the point is no one's making it, for why a kid should go and read Lady Chatterley's Lover when they could read, if they wanted to, an entire book that's fan fiction about the characters that they like. And will be generated with a beginning, middle, and an end, and a satisfying resolve, and we'll have prose that will be flowing, and there's full sentences and effective punctuation. And again, I think like kind of the idea that these tools will be used to allow people to produce facsimiles of legacy media that will be gratefully received by an audience that also has access to these tools isn't how cultural production works, right? It's like it's the ability to suddenly write novels in a day isn't going to be brilliant. Now people are going to read 100 novels a week.
Yeah, but I think this also like comes back to this question of like the meta question of like, what is education? Why is education? And the idea of like canon, you know, because let's just going back to David's point of like the time scale of mind formation, right? Call that 20 years of being in like the education system, what that's guiding you towards, I think in the American context being like an informed public to some degree, a capable public to some degree.
Yeah.
Questions on that. You know, production, how we relate to infinite production, mind formation and consumption, and towards what outcomes, I think is like the shape that we're rotating in the center of this, right? And this is why canon is so important. And to bring it all the way back to Thiel, why he wrote that book on like the diversity myth, because during that time at Stanford, there's a big question of the Western canon class and folks wanting to diversify what Western canon was, which then turned into a complete obliteration of the Western canon class. And that turned into like, you know, just like a group of important writings that then that class was sort of like starting to get formed around. And so I think like it brings this really interesting question of like, what is canon? To what end? Right. And unless we can define, well, we've done a lot of work to define canon, but unless we can define towards what end today in big 2025, then we're going to really struggle into, well, what are the inputs to that output? And do we even have the patience to see these things through? Or has the speed around us increased so quickly that we can't even say towards what end anymore? And I think what's more scary is when the speed of environment doesn't even allow us to determine towards what end, where is this ship going? Because then the environment becomes its own sort of, I don't know, like mosquito, you know, we just
I feel like that's such a beautiful thing to identify though. Sometimes when I think about the American contemporary model of like hyper-accelerationist technological capitalism, I think it's like an incredible achievement of thinking or philosophy, in the sense that like I believe that like a small group of people have managed to invent almost the exact opposite of Buddhism. They've managed to create a system where and this is why I think actually one of the most interesting things, in addition to McLuhan and Claude Shannon, that people could read right now is Buddhist texts. And I think people should seriously, because both like the concept of both presence of mind and the presence of no mind, and of the destruction of the ego and the destruction of self, but also the separation of the barrier between the self and one's physical environment. For me, achieving enlightenment by sitting under a tree and doing nothing, for me, is the exact opposite of what ChatGPT needs the human of 20 years from now, at 20 years old, to be doing. They need someone who is constantly feeding input into the machine. And they also need someone who it's like requires the machine to mediate any experience on Earth. And what Buddhism, in an incredible way, did was hypothesize the exact other end of this horseshoe, where it's like, what if you could actually remove any form of machine, including language, including thought, including self, that separates you from the environment, from experience, from being. And I think like these forms of like enlightenment, of like self-obliteration, these feel like the most interesting counterpoints that Silicon Valley has no answers to the technological proposition of what they think the life of the future might be. I think
they do have an answer to it though, right? It's just like hyper negative. It's like, you will get left behind. It's the like NGMI, like not going to make it, which I think one of the more interesting things that happened over the past 5 years was how not going to make it went from a crypto term of if you don't have Bitcoin or Ethereum, you're not going to make it, into an AI term, which is if you're not going complete cyborg mode, you're not going to make it.
But it's really it's obviously like kind of like it's the devil's bargain, right? It's a fallacy.
Yes, it says.
But like no one can keep up. Like you're going to be on the hamster wheel for the rest of your life. You're going to be learning a new model every week. You're going to be changing your workflow, and also you're going to be doing it against the background of the collapse of labor value, of systems of protection, of social systems that make the value of the things you earn from mastering the systems less and less every day. So, and what the systems need, and this is also why I think like kind of I describe as a cataclysm, the collapse won't come now, but within 15 or 20 years, I think we'll hit like an absolute inflection point with these systems by depriving people of the means for them to achieve the leisure time or income or capital with which to actually direct their desires or hopes. Like there will be no input to these systems, like kind of like that, like ultimately what the system requires. And no one is putting time into this. No, like this is one of the things Silicon Valley pretended at least 15 years ago that it was trying to do, right? With like UBI experiments and this idea of like, we're going to create the technology where you can do anything you want, but we're going to manifest the social conditions that allow you to use the technology. And they've given this up completely. None of them talk about, none of them are even trying. Instead, it's all just about extraction of attention, extraction of capital, and extraction of like literally input from individuals, from users, in order to accelerate their models, because they're all deathly scared that someone else will get to the giant honeypot quicker than them, and that they can't take a moment to smell the roses and do nice things for everyone, because if they do, the next model that comes out of DeepSeek Labs or comes out of Meta Labs or comes out down the road from OpenAI will kick their model in the arse. So they need input all the time. And it's like, it's obviously a shit show. It's a catastrophe. It is obviously a system that is like pregnant with its own failure. I don't know if we have to pretend around it, be like, maybe we'll see what happens. Like it's like nothing about this is being engineered towards any of the big goals that would allow it to be useful. Like it's not being directed to solve political problems. It's not being directed to actually create like kind of meaningful solutions. It's certainly not imbuing you with more time, more freedom to do things. I think if anything, it just devalues the labor that, like, you know, it's a supply and demand problem immediately, like where actually, and I just want to say this because I like Reggie, you very perceptively like kind of dismissed the earlier like kind of this overfixation on the idea of devaluing labor, which I agree is like a kind of common problem in AI critique. But what I will say is that it devalues the attention of the viewer or the product of the labor. It devalues the product. So like previously it might have taken me like, I'm a graphic designer, it may have taken me 5 hours to make an image, and now I can make it in 10 seconds. But both processes result in an image. But in the reality where images took 5 hours to make, the value of an image was much higher. And it's like, now you can spend 5 seconds, but that thing is worth nothing. And you can't go back to spending 5 hours and it meaning something anymore. All images are worth nothing. The 5-hour image is worth nothing, and the Midjourney image is worth nothing. Both of them are worth nothing to the viewer. They're just
worth much closer to nothing, if not nothing yet. I mean, I think that we see as consumers of media, and I actually don't know if Reggie is a millennial. I think you might have millennialized Reggie, David, but you and I are.
Sorry, Reggie.
I'm a cusper. I'm a cusper. I was born in '95.
That's a horrible.
I just wanted to flag that act of violence. You know, I was thinking about this. I think about this all the time, but I was thinking about it yesterday. Like, we can see with our experience of music that the removal of friction around being able to access music massively degraded our experience of music. Like, of course, some of us old heads can manufacture a great experience of music, but it was having infinitely available, being able to listen to almost any recording of a great deal, if not almost all of the great music ever made in 1 second, is not the miracle that it might have sounded like when it was hard to get to music. Like, it definitely makes it's harder now to find that deep appreciation of music. It's not impossible, but it's harder.
and it's not just the difficulty. And I'm sorry, Reggie, because I feel like I know I've talked a lot, and I don't want to. It's really, really fun.
I love listening to
like
this. So.
With music and the publishing of cultural, like, kind of musical content, like, kind of like, let's just like time warp back. It's 1985. You're living in downtown New York. The Slits have put out a new record or whatever. You walk to the record store. You don't, like, you walk there. There's a poster on the front, like in the windows of the record store, saying new record by the Slits. You didn't know about this. Maybe you read it in the Village Voice. Okay, so you walked to the newspaper box. You picked it up. You bought it. Maybe you saw some friends on the way to get coffee. Like, kind of, you're in a particular neighborhood that even sells the Village Voice, means you probably moved to New York. You lived in Idaho, but you've gone there because you like music. Okay, you want to find out about this stuff. You walk down the block, you go to the record store, you see friends in the record store, you say hey to them, you ask the clerk, what's good this week? Okay, you listen to the new Slits record, it's amazing, you buy it, you take it home, you play it for your friends in the apartment that night, it's the first time they've heard it, etc. All of these things, it's like passing a rope down a pipe, and the rope is touching the edges of the pipe, and it's picking up things at every step of this process. Like, the rope is like, kind of like, it's accumulating life, it's accumulating experience, it's accumulating information. That is culture. Culture is not the rope. Culture is not the thing which connects point A and point B. It's not the ability for me to press play and hear the Slits. It's everything that happens in between. And if you remove all of it, you remove all the culture, all the meaning, all the value. That's how it's accumulated. And this is exactly the same thing as why the proposition that, like, ChatGPT can just give you knowledge is exactly the same problem as the culture problem, like with all these steps in knowledge music, in that it's not the answer which makes you smart. It's all the thinking you did on the way, all the processes, even the wrong answers that you the techniques that you developed to remember the answer, the ways that you articulated it. If the engine does all of that for you, you did nothing. You learned nothing. The brain is a physical, plastic, like system of interactions, and if none of them happen, nothing was gained. No knowledge was gained. Like, kind of, you just got a unit, an answer. Like, that's all you got. It's like, again, like, kind of like your neighborhood is gone, your Village Voice is gone, the clerks who live in the store, like, kind of like, who hang out in the store, are gone. All of the richness which made all these things valuable, and you can't retro-engineer it. Just like in the same way that when someone that, like, publishes an AI generated piece of music on Spotify right now, from an AI generated, when Spotify publishes an AI generated beat from an AI generated band with an AI generated image room that looks verisimilitude the same as what a new band from Norway might look like if they're playing the song, and you don't hear the difference. It's like both of those things, that's what I mean, are reduced to zero. Both of them have, like, kind of like, the band from Norway, unfortunately, moves closer to an object with, like, no rope, no chain, no anchor in the world. That's what's being invented here. Is, like, kind of like the ability to, like, remove the culture from a process, remove the thinking from a process. And again, like, kind of like, I want to talk about, like, kind of the, like, cognitive atrophy, which I think is really, really important. Like, these people who are graduating from college and ChatGPT wrote all their essays. Like, yes, they technically handed in essays which satisfied the course criteria, but in doing no thinking, I believe that they literally became stupider through the process of having that education than they did when they started. Like the brain is a muscle, but also it's all these connections, all the misturns, all the wrong things that you did, all the right things that you did, the reinforcement of multiple right things adding up to form shapes that form then like these specular realizations, where you then apply that method of thinking to something else. That is intellectual growth. That is cognitive development. And a machine that gives you answers, I know this is a very, very boring, very, very basic point, but this is also why, like, it's interesting to live in a time where, like, saying things that are this boring and this basic is like eye roll lame. And it's like, that's how we get to a point where, like, someone, you know, in a gilet and a sweater vest who got, like, you know, 8 billion in venture funding from some gray corporation, like, kind of can say the biggest bullshit ever, and it's considered more interesting than someone saying something that's just functionally true. There's no capital. This is a very boring idea. This is like the last. No one is investing in this idea that this is probably bad and isn't leading to, like, productive social outcomes.
But David, I'm going to stop you there and ask for the white pill from Reggie.
Yeah, I think
not no, obviously. I really appreciate that framing. And Reggie, yeah. I'm curious, like, is that landing with you? Is that how you see it? I bet it's a little bit different.
It's a little bit different. I think a lot of what David is saying is true, but I do think there are cuts of just, like, equal and opposite reactions, you know. So I'm going to take the music example because I just have a really clean example of this in the other way. My co-founder showed me the most recent McGee album, which to me is like the closest I've gone to Frank Ocean's Blonde since 2016. Frank Ocean, where are you? He shows me that album in person, right? We built a tower speaker with our friend Sora, and he plays it on the speaker. It's incredible. I listened to it on Spotify nonstop. Then my friend had tickets to the McGee show in New York. I biked to the McGee show, right? I'm excited. The city is pulsing all around me. For some reason, it's at Terminal 5. So uptown for me. And when the first bass comes through that speaker, it is like a religious experience, right? It's in person. I'm running into a bunch of friends from around the city that are also into McGee that I didn't know were going to be at that show. I stay at that show all the way to the end. I'm so high off my own supply of listening to the show. I bike all the way back to Brooklyn, listening and singing McGee out loud. And I tell my wife when I get home how incredible the concert is, right? To me, that is the same level of pushing the rope through the pipe, right, as this other thing. Is it made up of all the same components? No.
But I don't disagree with you, Reggie. That's culture. But
for sure.
I'll let you finish your question.
Let Reggie finish.
But I guess what I'm saying is I think what ends up happening, right, is this same sort of like supply recalibration where the emphasis previously was put on Spotify and the infinity of its sort of library, the new emphasis gets put on that IRL experience. And I think we're already seeing that a lot. And I think a lot of things are going to start looking like the Bob Dylan Never Ending Tour, where and this is going to be a new cost, where like these folks are just constantly doing live experiences, because not only is that where the majority of these folks' money is made, but it's also where the reality of that culture gets put to a testing ground. And that's where the market is going to start to determine it. That's maybe part of my white pill on the music.
Push the friction back in.
No, I don't think that's a white pill for this technology. I think, and I hate to say this, Reggie.
No, it's not a white pill for the technology. It's a white pill for the culture.
I misgenerationed you already once in this conversation when I called you a millennial, but now I'm going to call you a boomer in the sense that like all that is you like reproducing the learned feedback loops that you grew up with of how you consume music of value. But someone who's 4 years old now,
that's not true. Because I consume
when they're 16 and when their entire discovery algorithm and their friends, and even the idea that a friend might build them a speaker cabinet. Oh, Reggie, you don't know how boomerized that's going to sound.
No. But all of my music discovery growing up was Spotify. I got Spotify in high school.
You said your dad's a pastor. I bet you listen to records at home. You've got expensive high-end on right now.
No. I listen to
high fidelity audio. You've got custom built speaker cabinets.
Don't worry about that.
And it's not a bad thing. None of this is bad.
No, but my first iPod,
David.
My iPod was in 5th grade. I got an iPod in 5th grade. I had iTunes in 5th grade, and that turned into Spotify, I think, in 8th or 9th grade. So my discovery has been deeply my discovery has been deeply algorithmic from a very, very early time. And even when I listen to a lot of these first albums,
what it makes me think of, and I don't want to speak for your experience, but maybe because that wasn't you probably had some access to a blueprint of a different type of music experience.
And this is why I think.
You know what I mean? And that's different. Those things being co-present is very different than one being like super devalued and atrophied and the other one being very developed. And so I feel like maybe that's what David is sort of touching on.
For sure. But this is why I think
like this development thing, like you can't go to a concert until you're like 7 or 8 years old. Like realistically, right? You can't bring a 2-year-old to a concert. You can, but it's I think this is why being like a great idea, but those people will have relationships that are formed with whatever the at-hand distribution system for music is before a lot of them go to a live show. And also, as economic conditions continue to degrade, the idea that people in every community can afford to go and see a live act often, I think also because these touring musicians, Beyonce played 5 nights in London recently and tickets were £300 a head. And one of the things it's just like,
but we can't like anchor on like literally the biggest superstar in the world. The one thing I'll say is like, I think this is why being a cusper is very interesting, because I did have a lot of CDs in the house, right? But I also got my first iPod in 5th grade. And so like, yes, I saw these transitions in real time, and then I experienced the big transition in high school, which was Spotify. So
Yeah.
I think the larger thing I was trying to get at was sort of this underlying philosophy of the Valley, which is ruthless efficiency, and what we lose with ruthless efficiency, right? And I think this is what David's been getting at a lot, which sort of just like 5 hours from an image to 5 seconds to an image, or sort of like non-stop content getting blasted at your face from any sort of era without any sense of friction to discovery or acquisition of said media object, or like listening of that media object, right?
I would just say, like, kind of an important thing is it's not just a vector of the time it takes to create an image. It's the idea that the image must pass through a system of processes that must occur in the mind of a human being in order.
100%. And this is what I'm getting at. And this is the around the corner. It's like the value of friction, right? So just to use a sort of like Christian example, there's a verse in the Bible that talks about what it means to labor in prayer, right? Now, a lot of people get frustrated when their prayers aren't answered. Why is that? Because they view God as some genie in the sky waiting to answer these things. And when that doesn't occur, right, when their sense of efficiency of prayer is not met, there's a deep frustration there. But why is laboring in prayer so important? Because it's creating an internal process of faith in the individual. To me, the reason why I agree with David so much is because, like, it's this question of what does labor and friction do to the individual, right? It is not worthless to labor, right? Even in the Garden of Eden, the only perfect setting humanity has ever experienced, God gives Adam and Eve work, and he gives them 2 pieces of work. He gives them taking care of the garden and cataloging the animals. One is care for the environment and each other. The other is literally science, right? And so even in a perfect world, labor for the individual has a deep sense of transformation in that individual that we can't ignore. And so I think the biggest alignment David and I have is this point of what does labor do to the individual? It is clearly tied to dignity, and beyond dignity, it's clearly tied to a deep level of health, which then makes me think about this youth culture movement that was happening in China a few years ago called like the lie flat movement, where kids were just giving up and lying flat, very similar to sort of like a hikikomori style thing in Japan. And I think if we're not careful, what we turn into is literally just rotting away, right? And this is why I love the movie WALL-E, because the punchline in WALL-E is literally just a fat joke. It's just like we've started to rot away, and we're fat now, right? And the thought experiment I like to do is like, if WALL-E, right, if the humans in WALL-E had GLP-1s, would we care as much? And that to me is even scarier, because we do have GLP-1s. It's like, if we rot away, but we're all skinny and hot, will people like even be awake to see what's happening to them? Or is it only scary if we're like fat? You know, and I think
another scary scenario, which might be where we wrap up, because this has been a very fruitful conversation already. What's coming to mind hearing you talk, both of you, is this question about friction, for lack of a better word, and what scares me is like, what happens when the pain point of the consumer, being the lack of friction, inspires the installation of like fake or useless friction back into
100%.
I feel like that's something to be very concerned about and watchful of, because there's not all friction is created equal. Like, it doesn't all have the same function. And I could easily imagine, because you see some of this in like luxury or scarcity or hype economies, are trying to kind of like maintain the enchantment around fashion, for example. Another thing that it's very difficult to maintain that. I mean, I've always had trouble. Sometimes I'm obsessed with it and sometimes I don't care. And like, but I feel like everyone is sort of in that place, or a lot of people are, you know, all of these mechanics around luxury and exclusivity and drops are like trying to sort of install friction back into the system, or like you see it in hospitality with events, like, and I think that there's something to be very mindful of is what will happen when things get so ruthlessly optimized and so frictionless that friction needs to come back, but it's like still friction toward that same end.
100%.
I think there's always like the beauty and the pain of experience is that it's all friction to the extent to which you want to perceive it. And I think Reggie's point about prayer is so beautiful, and this identification of this idea that like that the point of prayer may not be the response of God, which you as an individual should maybe not learn to become fixated on or believe that you could be privy to, but instead the point of prayer is to become aware of praying itself, and that prayer as an activity is, you know, like a form of both like a manifestation or an understanding of one's desires, an articulation of your hopes, of your fears, and putting that into language, internalizing that, reflecting on those things, one becomes more aware of themselves and one becomes more aware of their context. And it's exactly the same thing, I think, with these incredibly powerful tools that are in front of us. The value can only be recuperated in here. Like no matter what they give us, none of that matters unless something happens here. And to reflect and to become aware of that, I think, is the first order of action that one must take when engaging with AI. And I'll finish with one last very quick thing, because I think it's Reggie's I think very beautiful identification of these things made me think of it, and that's this I think very, very special point that a philosopher at the New School, Omri Bohm, who's still was and lectures there. He lectures on Kant, and he made this very, very wonderful kind of realization, articulation, which I don't think I've heard anyone else make, about what Kant's moral philosophy added to human thought that hadn't previously been there. And he was like, before Kant, there were like two great themes in morality that basically all moral systems focused on: what I should do and what I should not do. What ought I do? What must I not do? And there are various justifications, whether it's God or the law, or as to why one should do that, or, you know, what the consequence of it will be. But that was basically how systems work. And Kant identified, he said, at a fundamental, there's a third intrinsic component of morality, which is really, you know, like kind of, it is essential to it. And you cannot have moral or ethical systems without this. And that is for the individual, to what or for what am I entitled to hope? And for Kant, he's like, this is a fundamental aspect of life, of ethical being. And if you are forbidden from asking this question, or if you do not ask this question, then you are being suppressed as an individual who can even act ethically, who can make their own decisions. And I think like that is also the thing about AI, where when we talk about these accelerationists saying like, kind of like, well, like, you're not going to exist in the future, you'll just be a component of this machine or whatever. I feel like the most simple question you can ask of anyone using this is like, what are you entitled to hope? What would you like happened from these systems? What would you like them to produce? And then you can start asking yourself if they are, or do you feel like you're heading in that direction? But until you ask that question, you're already like kind of at a disadvantage. You are the non-actor. You're the machine in the system, and the machine is the human that has a hope, because they certainly have a hope for what this thing will do. So yeah, like kind of that's one simple way to invert the power dynamic with the system. Anyway, I'll leave it there with some Kant.
Yeah, that reminds me of in Adam Curtis's hypernormalization. There's like some archival footage of talking to this woman in Russia, and she's like cleaning like her walls, and they're asking her like, what do you dream about? And she's like, dreams. And they're just like, yeah, what do you dream about? It's like, I used to have dreams. Like, I realized there's no point in having dreams here, you know. And it's supposed to be this understanding of like what was happening in like the Soviet Union, like pre-collapse, and sort of like, again, I go back to like psychoterrorism. Like, that was a psychological state that populace was put in that absolutely destroyed their capacity for dreams and for hope. And that's a deeply scary thing. And if we simply offload that authority to the field, the AGI crew at OpenAI and these other labs, like that is a deeply scary thing if their view of the populace is, again, like pre-Reformation Catholic Church, these are just simple people that we must shepherd into a direction. This is why I'm Presbyterian also. But anyway, I think that, yeah, I mean, I don't think I have that much to add to David's point. I think at the core, this comes down to a few like really key things, which is like human dignity. It comes down to giving people the tools to guard and continually build their own awareness, which I tend to lean on McLuhan for. And it comes down to, is there enough sort of, for lack of a better term, political will to see these things through and to not be afraid, particularly folks that engage in like the technology sphere, not be afraid to have these differing opinions. And I think the thing that I'm actually most scared about are people that know better that tend to be incredibly silent because they don't want to miss out on a bag, and yeah, what is it for a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul in the process? Like we can't behave that way.
Reggie,
We have to end there. We have to end there with that.
I'm so happy to hear a Presbyterian preacher's take on AI.
Yeah, that's perfect. Guys, what a treat and what a trip to go over all of this with you. I have my popcorn out and curious. I'm very curious what happens, But yeah, let's call it there.